Everyone, welcome. We're gonna dive right in. I'll kick it off, Joe, and then hand it over to you for just kind of some general housekeeping, and then we'll introduce Kevin and Eric formally, and then hand it over to you all. But if you're new to Durable, Durable is about a year in building what we call Utah's business commons. This idea that every great city once had a common square, and Utah in particular punches above its weight class in a variety of areas, in business and entrepreneurship through acquisition. And I think, the same way that every city once had a great common square, what we're trying to do is help gather and convene business owners across the state through education opportunities like what we're doing today, event programming, various camaraderie. We do facilitated peer groups. And so really just our goal is to try to make the business owner's journey a little lighter, which is a hard thing to do because business ownership is a challenging endeavor in and of itself. But the one thing that makes it a little bit easier is doing it in community amongst peers and having a place where you can go to bring the challenge du jour to others who are going through the same challenges. So grateful everyone's here. Joe, you can advance the slide. We've been doing this a couple months. This is our expert webinar and workshop series. So we like bringing in experts from a variety of fields. One of the challenges of business ownership is you have to be a master of everything: marketing, finance, HR, and in particular on the M&A front and our ETA chapter. That's what we're going to be focusing in on today. So Joe, you can advance the slide. We asked, I guess, a little bit more on Utah's business commons. Like I said, peer groups. We host a variety of private invite-only dinners throughout the year, educational workshops, advisory, all built around the realities of running a small business. Joe, you can go ahead as well. About, how long has it been, Joe? 4 or 5 months? We kicked off the ETA chapter. So a big part of the future of Durable is kind of micro communities within the broader Durable community. And we're doing that through our chapter model. So our very first chapter was the ETA chapter. It's a subset of about 130 folks and growing that are interested in entrepreneurship through acquisition, essentially small business M&A. So primarily around searchers and buyers and independent sponsors, but also operators, CEOs, service providers. On our ETA chapter advisory board, we have university leadership from the University of Utah, BYU, UVU. And it's just an opportunity to try to gather everyone interested in ETA in the state of Utah, all under one roof to do specific niche programming. Joe he came to me and said, hey, I think this is something worth building. And Joe helps lead out our leadership team, which they put on a variety of events related to ETA. Joe, you can talk about that in a minute, but we have like a monthly lunch series. We do the expert webinar series for the ETA chapter. We have a couple of fun events coming up, but really grateful to Joe and his leadership for helping kind of lead the ETA community here in Utah. And with that, Joe, I'll hand it over to you to talk about today's guest and the agenda today, and we'll just jump right in.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate the introduction and the opportunity, Chase. And great recap of what we've accomplished so far. Like Chase said, we're at about 140 people within the ETA chapter here, all aspiring to buy businesses or deep in the search, and everything in between. Alongside them, we have a lot of support. So we're super excited today to have SMB Law. I mean, pretty unarguably the biggest name in the legal side of acquisitions. So thanks, Kevin and Eric, for taking the time. Before I hand it over to you, I just want to take a quick sec to talk about our leadership team here. So probably some familiar faces if you guys have come to an event or two, but we have Patrick McMillan at Amplio on the right there, and Christian Krause on the left. And we're open and looking for 1 or 2 more spots to help lead the ETA chapter. So if you're interested in planning events and getting a community built and really growing your own personal network as well, please do reach out after the call, and would love to talk more to see what other kind of future events we can put together as a team. So with that, like I said, we have Eric and Kevin today to talk from SMB Law. That's right. So we'll be talking, effectively about buying the business, not the problems. So the ins and outs of what to look for. And again, we're super excited to have you guys. Thanks for taking the time. Eric, do you want me to go ahead and stop sharing for your slides, or?
Yeah, you know what? We'll use our own. And thanks for the intro, Joe and Chase. And you said biggest names in the ETA space. You know, it's funny, and I didn't even tell him that I did this, but I was thinking around on ChatGPT on Saturday, and I was like, who's the go-to, like, number one SMB, lower middle market focused M&A lawyer in the country? And Kevin came up first, and it was like, Kevin Henderson by Deal Count, blah, 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 blah. And then it named a bunch of people, and it didn't mention me, and I was like, what about Eric Pasavici? Like, is that guy any good? So anyway, so Kevin's on the line. So Kevin's the star of the show here. But great to see everybody. We do have a PowerPoint that our content person is sending to us right now. So we'll pull that up in just a second. But Kevin, feel free to introduce yourself, even though I sort of just did.
Well, with that, I don't know that there's much else I can say, but I sit in Dallas, though spent some time in Utah. It's a second home for me, and ironically have a lot of business interests myself in Utah, particularly in the medical cannabis vertical. So I know your market, and I know the small business community in Salt Lake very well, and always a pleasure to be participating with you guys. So.
Yeah, awesome. Well, good. So SMB Law Group, we're a boutique transactional law firm founded in 2022. Kevin and I were both former Big Law trained, top 14 educated attorneys, and sort of fell in love with the lower middle market, Main Street, real people buying real businesses, became active socially in this community, and then ultimately decided to launch a firm focusing on that. It was last month, 4 years ago, so May of 2022. Since then, we've closed about 385 transactions for about $1.8 billion. Worked on many, many more. We've built a firm, and let me see if I can get Kevin, can you download the PowerPoint and put it up?
Yeah, I'll have it to you in a second, Eric.
Cool, thanks. We started with first principles, right? Like, we're Big Law trained attorneys, but we said, how do we build a firm specifically for you guys, right? For the lower middle market, for people who use lawyers, people who are buying businesses, people who have existing companies and have dealt with lawyers and, are generally unhappy with the experience. If you look at like NPS scores, if you guys are familiar with that concept, the average NPS for the American law firm is like a 24. It's a very bad score. It's a net detractor score. The average legal client says, not only am I unhappy, I'm so unhappy that don't ever use the person that I used, right? That's the baseline experience. And so we launched the firm. Unfortunately, we had the help of social communities and the like to tell us what they wanted from a lawyer. And they said, we want predictability of spend, right? That was the number one answer is, lawyers and their surprise hourly billing, misaligned incentives, communication problems, doesn't really work. As far as service providers go, I suspect there's a lot of service providers on this call. Lawyers are notoriously bad at the process part, right? Like, substance can be great, like great line of the law, knows the judge and can get me the result. But like, if he doesn't return my emails and I don't hear from him for 3 weeks at a time, like, still not ideal, right? So we built from first principles, from scratch, implemented a lot of technology. Last year we were named by Financial Times as one of the most innovative law firms in North America. And this year we were named as the most innovative law firm in the state of Florida, which is a long ways away from Utah, but nonetheless. And that's sort of the high level on us. Kevin, anything to add?
No, I think that's great. Let's jump into the meat.
Yeah, do we have the PowerPoint, Kev?
You do. As a fellow lover of Microsoft, that's in your team.
Oh God, I thought you just put it up here.
I love that.
Yeah, let's just run through. We are still lawyers, so we'll take you guys through the disclaimers. I love how I just said we're one of the most innovative law firms in North America, and then I'm struggling to get a PowerPoint on screen. So that's really telling an awesome
Other than like
story
every
here.
time we get a bank on with Google Meet, like I feel like half of all banks aren't compliant with it, and they just can't even join. So the fact that you're here,
They're like, we're going to need everybody to download our Ring Central app in order to take part in this. Can you guys see that? Okay, so buying the business,
Yep.
not the problems. How buyers spot legal risk, structure around it, and avoid owning the seller's mess. And we'll take you guys through some slides and have direction to this. But if you guys want to jump in, if there's anybody who has specific questions, Chase and company, included, feel free to do that. We are lawyers. We're not your lawyers. We're licensed in a number of states, including Utah. Kevin's in Texas. I'm in Florida, and a number of the larger jurisdictions: New York, California, Illinois. We have lawyers and licenses. And this is a little jumbled, it looks like, in the download, but that's okay. So, Kevin, lead us off. Core issue. You're trying to buy a business. You're evaluating risks. What are you looking for? Where are you starting?
Yeah, I mean, the place that most people get tripped up is over focusing in the wrong place that really, really gets ironed out in the very early stages of the deal, right? People get hyper fixated on valuation. They get hyper fixated on purchase price, which is correct. It's the correct hyper fixation at the start of the transaction, right? And once you move beyond that, your focus really needs to change to risk mitigation, right? And what you're really worried about are the things that aren't obvious to you, right? It's super important to do a quality of earnings. It's super important to do your due diligence, but you're not worried about what your quality of earnings provider finds in their report. You're worried about what they don't find in their report, right? You're worried about the lurking issues that are under the surface. And the bullet point here, right? Every dollar of legal risk that you catch before closing is cheap. You can structure around it. If we uncover an issue, it takes an extra 30 minutes of lawyer hours to draft a special indemnity provision into an agreement, right? It's a couple $100. That's really cheap as compared to not structuring around that risk, not doing the best you can to mitigate that risk, and it turning into a true liability after the closing can be 5, 6, 7 figures of damages, right? So spending the time to identify and mitigate as much risk as you possibly can during the transaction process and not after is the core idea here.
Yep. And can you guys still see the PowerPoint? I put it in presentation mode, so just want to make sure everybody can see that on the screen. Kevin, we got that? Okay, great. And we'll make this disclaimer multiple times, and it sounds self-serving, but it's true and it's worth saying out loud. If you're going to buy a business, guys, hire a good lawyer. Do it. Hire a good lawyer. And what you're principally looking for before you've bought the business is there's 3 categories of risk. I think about risk categorically. Category number 1 is, yes, it is a legal risk, but it is not a big one. It is not a problem. I'm not going to trouble the seller with it. I can fix it after the closing. Think about things like policies, right? Employment policies. If your jurisdiction says that you have to have a, disability policy for, people over 5'10", and it's not in place, that's probably not something you want to take to the seller and go, hey, we got a big problem here, and make, add friction to your transaction. Category 2 is problems that are material. They're bad, but you can fix it by making the seller own it, right? Through a concept we call line item indemnification, where you call it out separately and you say, Mr. Seller, we've identified this risk, whether it's a active litigation, an insurance problem, whatever it may be, you need to own it. And then category number 3 is, this risk is so bad, you need to kill the deal, right? I need to walk away because I can't, you haven't paid your taxes since 2010. I'm not going to put myself in that situation. And with the tools that exist today, and with where the ETA communities and service providers have gotten, you should be identifying and listing a lot of things in bucket number 2. Historically, you'd have maybe 1 or 2 line item indemnifications in a transaction, known litigation, right? That was one that you definitely have. We are having deals. I sent a purchase agreement this morning, no exaggeration, that has probably 6 different line item indemnifications in it. And we're opposite of an attorney who knows enough to get through the deal, but is not well suited for one of these deals. It's probably it's a $4.5 million acquisition with some earnout. And so finally, because my buyer has identified enough things, we just said, you're going to own all litigation, whether we know it exists now or in the future. Like, you basically just, Mr. Seller, you own everything. Like, anything pops up, it's going to be yours, and we're not taking the risk on any of it. And they're accepting it, right? So find a good service provider who knows what to look for, can find those things, and then be very aggressive in the process about asking for those things to be owned by the seller. Let's see. Let's talk about red flags early, Kevin. What are some of the big red flags? Let's go to this slide here. The bigger red flags that we see over and over again in transactions like this.
Yeah, and I think the most interesting thing here, to cut through the chase, to the chase, and we'll talk through some of these, but a number of these are not strictly legal issues, right? Legal issues are not usually the things that jeopardize a deal. We like Eric said, we can contract around those. So a lot of the really big red flags are non-legal things, right? They're business issues, they're financial issues that no matter, the amount of contracting or indemnity crafting that you do, it's just too hard to mitigate. And those are the ones you really have to be careful. They're the big traps, right? What are some of those big ones? Customer concentration, right? Customer concentration doesn't have to be huge. When people hear that term, they think, oh yeah, well, the biggest customer in my deal only represents 35% of revenue, not 80% of revenue. So I don't have a customer concentration problem. Well, you might, right? How much of the profitability of the business is tied to that 35% customer? And if they leave, right? If they represent 35% of your SDE, or worse, what if it's a really lucrative customer? What if that 35% customer concentration in revenue is 50% concentration of your SDE? That could be catastrophic if they leave, right? Customer concentration is a big one. And everyone loves war stories. Just a super quick one. I was doing a deal where the seller had to pull the plug about a year ago, based out of California, where they had a number of contracts. One contract was a fairly large one with a utility provider. As I recall, it was like 20 or 25% of revenue, and client was fairly comfortable with that until we got deeper into due diligence, and he discovered, guess what? The next 5 customers were all affiliated with that same public utility. And in the aggregate, they represented like 80% of the revenue. So a quick review on paper showed 6 different customers, 6 different names, 6 different addresses, but a little bit of digging revealed they're really one customer and they had a massive concentration risk, right? You have to be super careful of customer concentration, and you have to probe deeper than just show me the list of top customers. Oh, the top 10 customers, none of them represent an outsized amount.
Yeah.
Undocumented anything, right? These are small businesses, right? Customer lists, customer phone numbers, the next maintenance schedule on the XYZ system. A lot of times that lives up in a seller's head, a GM's head, a tech's head, right? There's not great record keeping. There aren't great processes. There's not great historical records. You need to be careful of that. That's a huge red flag. Another quick war story. Had a client close a deal a couple of years ago that nobody realized when they were going out in the field and installing and servicing equipment. They put a sticker on the equipment with the company's name and phone number, which happened to be the seller's cell phone number. A couple of years later, there's been a bit of a falling out with the seller. They're not super friendly anymore. The seller's going to do them no favors. Guess what's happening with that seller? Every time one of those prior customers is calling his personal cell phone number because that didn't transfer with the business, right? Huge revenue leak to that company, and twofold: not understanding what's going on in the field and labeling the equipment, and not retaining ownership to the seller's private cell phone number because the private cell phone number was actually the business number, right? making sure you have the records and documents for everything. Financial cleanliness, I doubt we need to beat a dead horse here. I presume you've had other quality of earnings providers, speak in the past. But quality of earnings, it's easy for us to spend your money. I get it, but we highly, 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 highly encourage a quality of earnings in every deal. Even if, and sometimes especially if your background is in accounting, right? You need that disinterested third party that doesn't have the emotion that you bring into your own deal to approach things objectively. I don't want to burn 15 minutes here, so we could tick through some more of these much more quickly. Worker misclassification, employees classified as independent contractors that really should be employees, huge potential tax risk at the state and federal level. Corporate housekeeping, this is particularly important where for example, like an S corporation election has been made on a corporation or an LLC, you have to do certain corporate housekeeping items to maintain eligibility for things like that. That can be a huge red flag. The lease. Guys, leases can be deal killers. This is worth pausing on for a minute. They can be deal killers for a lot of reasons, but just a couple really quickly. If you're using SBA financing, you have to have a lease term and or term combined with renewal terms of at least 10 years. That's oftentimes not something a landlord wants to do, right? And it's something you want to get ahead of early on. It can jeopardize the deal and has certainly jeopardized the deals that I've worked on in the past. I had a recent deal that there was a provision that said on any request for a assignment of lease that the tenant would pay the landlord a fee equal to 5% of the enterprise value of the company in the transaction, right? It would have been a $50,000 fee to the landlord to review and execute an assignment. And the seller had no idea it was there because he never paid attention. He just signed the lease because you just sign a lease and no big deal. That could have been catastrophic to the deal. And then the worst egregious scenario, guys, people do crazy stuff with leases. They'll doctor things. We've seen, I can't find the Second Amendment. I can only find the First and Third Amendment. And, lo and behold, the Second Amendment has a crazy assignment fee provision in it. You have to make sure that you review in detail every single lease that you're going to be dealing with. IP ownership, super important to track IP ownership. I already made reference to the client with the cell phone. A lot of people don't think about a cell phone number as IP, but it is, right? It is a non-material asset to the business. It's the very definition of intellectual property. And so a lot of people think patents, a lot of people think trademarks. It goes way beyond that, guys. Ownership of URLs, making sure those get transferred. Phone numbers, customer databases and records, all those types of things. You have to make sure that you track the ownership. If you're buying a business and not checking who the owner is listed on a domain, that could be really bad for your business, because if it's listed in Eric Pacifici's name and we sell SMB Law Group, Eric Pacifici is under no obligation to transfer the SMB Law Group domain, right? He's not a party to the transaction potentially. Litigation, we already mentioned, especially stuff that may be about to become litigation. You want to ask detailed questions. Have you received any threats? Have you received cease and desist letters? Not just, has anyone sued you? What else am I missing, Eric?
Well, I mean, listen, I don't think we need to go through every specific risk in great detail. I would say, to put a bow on that, not all risks are created equally too, right? Like I just got off a call and the client said, hey, one more thing, the prospective seller's son is in the business. Is that a risk? What do we do about that? And I said, well, that can be one of a lot of things. And it ranges from he's so core to the business that he runs it that, because he's not actually a seller and he won't be subject to a non-compete, he could roll out the first day after closing and go compete with you and steal all of your business and put you out of business. Or, he's a loser, right? Other end of the spectrum, and he's just on daddy's payroll because
A drain on resources.
he's a drain on resources, right? And either one of those things has its own special considerations, right? And so, if he's a competitive risk, then we need to make sure that daddy's non-compete is subject to, implications if he competes, and sort of tie them together and say we can't go after son because he's not the seller, but we'll go after dad for son's competition. So it's sort of his job to keep him in line. And if he's a loser, or even if he's a competitive threat, but he's a toxic member of the culture, then we need to have some levers to pull, because dad said, we got to make sure he's get some equity and he's, sticks around and blah, blah, blah. Well, if he's a toxic member of the business community and is undermining you after you buy the business, you got to have some levers you can pull to get him out of there as well. So when you identify a risk and you just say customer concentration, as Kevin said, that can mean many, many things, and it can be addressed in many ways. And you say son in the business or person, spouse in the business, what does that risk mean? It can mean a lot of things, and you sort of have to figure out what the facts and circumstances are. So identifying the risk is step number one, and then evaluating the risk and addressing the risk are step number 2 and 3. So if you don't get past step 1 and you don't even find the risk, then you definitely aren't going to get to steps 2 and 3, and you're going to buy a business where you're going to have a lot of dollars post-closing that you potentially lose. All right, let's go to the next slide. Customer concentration. You mentioned undocumented everything. I think that one's worth double clicking on. These businesses, and the analogy I always like to use is a machine, right? A business is, when you break it down, it's a machine that produces revenue and earnings that you as a buyer are going to acquire, right? You're acquiring the machine that produces money. And the machine is made up of different parts, much like any machine. It has its own components. Most American service businesses are comprised of people, contracts, IP. They've got a Google reviews. They've got a brand. They've got, those things, right? Permits, licenses. And your job in the diligence process is to, especially if you're buying assets, right? And the difference between asset deal and stock deal, very important. And I want to make this PSA, which is you should be doing an asset deal 90% of the time, unless there is a very good reason to do a stock deal. You're going to buy all of the historical liability of the target company in a stock deal, and that can be really bad things. We've seen some horrible examples where people have bought businesses and inherited bad things that were just beyond the scope of what you could conceivably diligence for, and were way beyond what you could possibly put contractual limitations on, right? For example, we had a client who bought a business and then found out that the seller had been accused of giving kickbacks to the department of head for the neighboring state, which happened to be a major client of the business. And because of that, the business was subject to 3 times clawback of all that revenue, all the way back to when it began. If he had bought it as an asset deal, he would have got that letter from the neighboring state saying you're under investigation by the Department of Justice, and handed it to the seller and said, good luck with that. But in a stock deal, it's yours, right? And so when you think about buying that machine in an asset deal, you're taking the machine apart and you're putting it back together in your own entity. And by doing that, you sever off all that historical liability. In a stock deal, you're just buying the whole machine, right? So that's an extra layer of sort of legal diligence, which is, what structure do I have? If I have an asset structure, okay, now I need to diligence to make sure when I take all of those components apart that I can bring them over to my new entity and get the benefit of the full machine that was producing the full revenue that I'm paying for in a multiple. Or if I'm buying the whole machine in a stock deal, then I need to look deep, right? And I need to be aggressive in my diligence and aggressive in my negotiation, because I'm going to own all of the historical liabilities saved for what I identify and what is contractually mitigated. The problem is, and how this ties into the undocumented everything, is that these small businesses typically are, not well put together, guys. Brett B. Shore says loosely functioning disasters, and that's you've ever been inside of a business, many of you who own businesses, I feel like that resonates in sort of a sick way where you go, thank God we're all disasters, but you also go, oh, I'm still a disaster, so life still sucks, but it is what it is. But the undocumented everything means it's very hard to make sure that when I buy an asset deal, I get all that stuff. If I've got customer relationships and brand and all that over here, but it's not, codified in an agreement that says it has a 3-year term and that customer or supplier can't go anywhere, then there really isn't anything to bring home, right? Or, if there is legal risks or litigation or threats of litigation or threats of EPA but it ain't documented. They never wrote it down, didn't have a system for internal controls for that stuff. Very hard to diligence. So these businesses, are very paper light. And even when the paper's there, like I had one recently where like the QB had dragged on for 3 months because the seller had just had hip surgery and all the documents were in the attic and she didn't have the physical capability to go up there and get them, right? So sort of a wild exercise. You got to make sure you're structured properly to account for the documentation problem. Let's see, what else should we talk about before we do Q&A? IP litigation, related party risk. When to involve counsel, Kevin? What stage in the deal? This is probably the number one question we get to, right? Is when should I come talk to you, Kevin? When should you involve a lawyer? How should you think about using a lawyer in a lower middle market deal, and how does that work?
As early and as much as possible with a big retain. No, I'm kidding. The candid answer is as early as possible, right? There are a lot of mistakes that you can get in front of at the LOI stage, right? That can save you a lot of heartache, right? And particularly with what we're talking about here, what are some of those mistakes we see? Agreeing to artificial due diligence deadlines. Guys, that is a concept borrowed from real estate purchasing. It is not an M&A concept that when you go under LOI, you have 20 days to do your due diligence review. You have 20 days to inspect a house if you're buying a house, but buying a $4.5 million business that you're personally guaranteeing, that is not the norm, right? Huge one that you can get in front of. So working with experienced counsel early on at the LOI phase can be really important. That said, and not to be too salesy, but to repeat Eric's, comment earlier, you want to work with someone that knows the space well and can be efficient because, those of us that love doing this because we love doing this aren't in this game to make a quick buck on an LOI review. We're in this game to make our money closing deals, right? And so you want to find and work with someone that you can involve early on at the LOI phase, try to avoid some of those early problems, but in a way that doesn't run up a $4,000 bill before you ever even ink an LOI, right? So that's really important to get them involved early. That said, the kind of next thing that I encourage clients, and this is probably a terrible sales tactic, but that is like once you sign the LOI, don't be too quick to engage your legal counsel, right? And this gets back to my earlier comment is that the diligence things that are going to most put your deal at risk aren't the legal issues, right? It's going to be financial, right? Valuation concerns based on quality of earnings. It's going to be business issues like uncovering that your top 6 customers are actually one affiliated customer, right? And the concentration's too high. A lot of those things are things that you can knock out in the initial few weeks post LOI before you start spending money with lawyers to draft documents and dig into legal due diligence. And you want to hire Patrick and the team at Amplio to do a quality of earnings review and come back to you and say, hey, earnings are actually $250,000 lighter than you expected. On a 4x multiple, you're overpaying by $1 million. Go have that very difficult conversation with the seller before you engage your lawyer and start digging in. So you can be really smart and kind of stage out how you involve your counsel to limit some of the financial impact of rushing too quickly while still focusing in the right order and the right priority on a lot of these diligence red flags and things that we're talking about. Fair characterization, Eric, or what would you change?
Kevin, I tuned you out after about third. No, I'm kidding. No, I think that's right. And, you want to be careful about, how much you spend on legal and in deals processes until you've got a deal, until you've gone through financial diligence, you've gone through the lending process and made sure that there's a bank will actually fund. If you've got investors, made sure you've had a meeting of the mind with the investors. We track a lot of data, and the biggest deal killer is the financial diligence. No surprise, 40% of deals that die because of financial diligence. Then they die because of bank lending and investors. They die because of seller, psychology where they flake out, which is fairly rare. They die because of lawyers that are over lawyering and kill deals. And so, if you look at the stats, I think it's like 80 to 90% of that stuff that's going to kill your deal can largely be sussed out like before you start the legal process, right? Like making sure when the seller gets cold feet at the last minute is one thing, but like making sure the relationship is solid with the seller, that they seem like somebody who's serious about selling. Make sure you got a bank that's lined up to lend. Make sure you got equity investors if you need them that are, you've had a meeting of the minds with about the deal. I've only seen a few successful instances of renegotiating purchase price and deal terms once you've brought in equity investors, because that level of complexity and uncertainty for the seller and for the broker doesn't really read well typically. They like simplicity and they like knowing that they've got somebody who's serious about transacting. So doing things in the appropriate cadence is very helpful.
Yeah.
All right. Structural solutions, right? This is sort of the second step. Step number one is identify risk. Kevin went through customer concentration, unloaned liabilities. We see deals from time to time where the seller, we had a seller who ran like $600,000 in annual expenses through his credit card off to the side, not showing up on the P&L. Looks pretty sweet, right? And then you close the deal and you go, well, wait a second, like something's not adding up. There's these other bills I wasn't aware of. Lease issues, IP issues, employment issues, whatever it may be, there are structural solutions for just about anything, right? And the biggest one that sort of severs off 80 to 90% of it is structuring your deal as an asset deal. If I were going to go buy a sub $10 million enterprise value business, I'm probably not doing it as a stock deal unless it's like a medical business, which I have no business buying a medical business, but you get the point. Something where it's like totally necessary to do a stock structure. Because that's going to take care of 80 to 90% of it. The rest of it, you can structure through, indemnity, escrows, holdbacks, having a seller note that is contingent. That's one of our most popular topics. We've got a white paper that we've written on contingent seller notes. Forgivable seller note, as they're sometimes known, although the word forgiveness has tax implications, so we try to say contingent, meaning you only pay a portion of the purchase price if certain conditions happen or do not happen, right? Like if you retain customers or if you hit certain revenue thresholds. Closing conditions, if you've got, I have a sale process right now and the business has a lot of really important therapists on their staff, and the buyers said, hey, I can't buy this business without the therapist, so I need to know they're bought in. Okay, well, we'll sign the purchase agreement, then you can go talk to the therapists, and 80% of the therapists need to give a thumbs up and sign an employment agreement, or there's no deal, right? You get the opportunity to walk away. You can build in structures like that. Special indemnities, I talked about. This is a great one. Those are for your second category risk. Category one, something that's not important, is a risk, but you can fix it post-closing. Category two, real risk to you and to the business. You'll close over it, but if it comes to fruition and there's a problem, you want the seller to own it. You build special line item indemnities in there for that. And if you're somebody who's buying a business today versus 4 years ago, the technology that exists, and you guys all know what I'm referring to, is very powerful. And if your service provider is not using it and using it responsibly, then you're leaving a lot of meat on the bone. You're losing a lot of opportunity to identify things. You're massive inefficiencies there. What's being sussed out in these deals because of the ability to review large scale number of documents with precision, is very significant. So, something to consider there. And then post-closing cleanup, right? The first 90 days post-closing, like if you're not closing without a list of legally identified things, 10 things that are, were identified in the diligence process that sort of need to be cleaned up immediately. And a lot of those things, guys, like candidly, you can go do on your own with like, if you need the policy for people who are over 5'10" in San Bernardino, California that are employed, whatever. You can go, have Claude write that policy for you. And that's, it's a great thing, right? And then all of a sudden you've got, because, if you're in some of these jurisdictions, you guys are in Utah, but I always laugh because I get that, I get these blasts from a service that we sign up for employment stuff. And if you look at it, man, if you are in certain counties in California, there's like 70 plus policies you need to have in place. And like, what percentage of businesses do you think have all those policies in place and they're all compliant? Like 0% would be my guess. 0 to 5%. So you can fix a lot of that stuff post-closing, but you have to know it exists first. So that's it. We have 13 minutes left. Kev, I don't know if you have any final words. Chase and team, if we want to turn it over to Q&A, up to you guys on where we go from here.
Yeah, let's do some Q&A.
Yeah, let's dive into Q&A. I think if you can give us the mic back maybe 2 minutes before top of the hour, just so we can wrap on time. But can I kick off Q&A? I'm just curious, the M&A space has changed so much in small business over the past 5 years. What are you two seeing? What's changed on the legal front?
I'm seeing a lot of documents that have underlines in the title for some reason. I'm trying to figure out why that is. Everybody's laughing because everybody knows exactly what I'm talking about. There's a lot more sophisticated people in lower middle market, which is a great thing for everybody. But the marketplace is still hot and heavy. I was just looking at somebody on LinkedIn who went to the Washington ETA group and gave a presentation on the ETA bubble, and I think that's true, right? Our valuations frothy, or businesses that are not as good, maybe sort of getting looks that they would never otherwise wouldn't have gotten a few years ago. Maybe, but we see a lot of people transacting really well. And on our data, from the people who've come through our firm, we have 90% of them that acquire and do what business owners do, right? J-curve and sort of grind, right? You're 3 years deep and you haven't hit your projections, and you wouldn't describe it as crushing it, but you paid your debt and you're doing okay. And that's a pretty amazing thing if you look at, and I'm not a finance guy, but if the return on investment, if you put down 10%, pay the debt over 5 years, you're probably a millionaire, right? What else are you going to do that in, right? So, and then you got, a small percentage of people that do worse than that, and you got a small percentage of people that sort of crush it. And so that's never really changed, right? It's been entrepreneurship throughout. And, I think that will continue to be the case, but still very, very busy, and a lot of people that are I've been searching for 4 months and I found a good business and I'm ready to transact is sort of what I see. Kevin, what's your take?
No, I think that's right. What else do I see? Purely anecdotal, we're seeing a shift in deal structures. The mix is increasingly not just straight down the fairway SBA. I've seen a weird higher number. Now it's a very small number, so it's relative, but I've had more all seller financing deals. I've had 4 or 5 of those consults in the past few months. I probably did 4 or 5 of those deals in the prior 3 years combined. So I think the kind of changing landscape of SBA and things like that are kind of prompting some people to get a little more creative in their asks, and also sellers and brokers to get a little more creative in what they're willing to entertain. Outside of that, I can't think of much else. Nothing's really changed in the actual legal world, Chase, to your direct question. There's not a lot of evolution and kind of what's going on there, which is kind of ironic, other than we continue to see a push down market from larger firms where competition for the big deals is becoming increasingly more difficult. I'm negotiating a $4 million LOI opposite my former colleagues at Cooley right now, and they dared to drop in a footnote, "What is market for small transactions like this?" to me, and it took every ounce of my energy not to be like, "Hey bitches, all right, you do one of these deals a year, we do 100. Let me tell you what's market." So I'm seeing more of that for sure.
Hey bitches, that's the legal term.
Hey bitches, I am the market.
Been fun
Search
watching.
my name on ChatGPT.
Yeah,
It's been fun watching you build this firm over the past 5 years. It's been just such interesting timing, so it's good to get your perspective on that. Let's change gears just for the sake of time, so we can get questions. I think we had Patrick and then Desiree.
What's up, Patrick? We love Patrick, by the way. We love
What's
him.
up?
How are you, man?
It's good to see y'all. Sorry that I am late. It was by design. I was watching Sam Rasati and Matt Beckman and Bruce Marks, on the other one. So they brought up something, and maybe you guys already covered this, and I apologize if so, but this is always on my mind as the QV guy. Networking capital. I know you guys have a phenomenal template that you use for an LOI. You have a template for your asset purchase. You have a template for your stock purchase. Networking capital, especially in the LMM deals, is always a difficult discussion point. Mm-hmm. What do you do as attorneys? I always encourage people to involve your attorney as a quick second, at least prior, just to make sure you got your LOI good. What do you recommend as far as the discussions or putting in the LOI for networking capital, the discussion? How do you make sure that you're addressing the right things? Because networking capital will absolutely kill a deal in the first 30, 60, 90 days quicker than anything. What do you do about it? What have you seen?
Yeah, you want to take that one, Kev, or you want me to take it?
I mean, I was just going to say, and feel free to disagree. My preference, because it is so difficult, brokers don't understand it, sellers don't understand it, etc., is not to be overly fixated on it in the LOI, right? It's going to slow down progress on the deal, but to be very clear about the fact that it will include a level of normalized working capital as our term of art. And I always try and get a reference that it will be, the target will be determined, by reference to the buyer's third-party quality of earnings review. And you put the buyer in the driver's seat of, here's the report that my independent accountants ran. They ran the analysis. They are telling me that the target working capital for this business should be $428,000. So when you're telling me it should be 150, the LOI says it's referencing my quality of earnings report. So you, Mr. Seller, need to justify to me why you think they're wrong. And let's all get on a phone call and you can try and make your case, but put them on the defensive. And that's usually my preference. But I find 9 times out of 10, when you try and get into that nitty gritty in the LOI, you're probably just going to lose the deal. The broker and seller is going to lose interest. They're going to see you as being difficult, and they're going to say, now move on to the next guy that's not asking to negotiate what the definition of current assets are in the LOI.
Love that.
Yeah.
Basically normalized in the LOI as determined by third-party QV firm.
You like that softball, Patrick?
Refer to. Say what?
You like that softball as determined by my third-party quality of earnings review by Amplio. Okay.
There we go. Now you're talking. Love it. No, thank you. Appreciate that, guys.
Absolutely.
Well, we're going to build and maybe you can help us with this, Patrick, but we need to build a resource for this. Because you're right, and it's crazy, right? Because even the basic tenets of it, I explained it to some sellers yesterday, and they were like, well, no problem if they set the peg high because like we should have plenty of AR, we should be able to hit it. I'm like, well, guys, like it's not about what you have, right? It's about what you need. And I was on with big accounting firm recently and their transactional guy, and he kept he was on the sell side and he kept railing on about like, well, this is what you had, this is what you've had, this is what you've had. And I'm like, hey, I'm not an accountant, but like, it's not who cares what we had, right? Like if we kept too much liquidity in the business, that's and we're not just going to give it to them because so that they can also be over whatever, and he couldn't get his head wrapped around that, right? So this is a very misunderstood concept that can kill you post closing, and every business owner who's on this right now is like, yeah, like making sure you don't run out of cash is paramount. But when you're buying a business, especially those of you that max out, right? If you go the 80-10-10 route, 80% bank debt, 10% from the seller, 10% from you, and if you're putting everything you have into the deal, you do not want to be liquidating your 401k 6 months post closing to try to make payroll. Like that's a nightmare of a life situation to find yourself in. So overcapitalize your deal. There's investors who will put money into the deal to drive up your DSCR, drive your LTV down, make sure you've got money on the balance sheet, and be very careful, especially in capital intensive businesses like pool construction and others. All right. Any more? Gonna leave you. Yeah, go ahead.
So this is either going to be a softball question or a really hard question, and I'll let you answer it however you want to. You touched on how businesses usually don't have the employment records properly set up. So they've got a bunch of 1099s that should be employees or vice versa. Let's say in a perfect world, they actually have them set up properly. Would you suggest to anyone, or what are your thoughts on rewriting those employment contracts anyway under the new owner versus keeping it under the separate, like the old business contracts of employment?
Well, as a baseline practical suggestion, you don't want to upset the apple cart when you're buying a business with people who are important for. So ripping up the existing employment agreements, unless you make them better and make them frothier with some, with money, because most employees don't really care about anything other than money, then you're injecting unnecessary risk. And that's sort of the downside. Why isn't every deal an asset deal? Well, then you have to fire and rehire and do all of these things. So that's sort of the downside of the asset structure. But, if you can avoid that, the best situation ever to be in as a buyer is nobody even knows you bought the business, as business as usual. But if it's terrible paper and those are key people to the business, I would suggest you do that pre-closing, not post, right? Make that a pre-closing condition. We had one recently where, and I actually mentioned it, and they, proposed a bunch of really aggressive non-compete terms and stuff that was different than what they had suggested to the seller they were going to ask for, and they lost a person over it. The seller lost their key person, or one of their key people, and he was obviously livid, and it put the whole transaction in jeopardy. So you got to be really diplomatic about how you approach all that.
Yeah, that's what I figured the answer would be, but nobody ever talks about it. And people think about it, so I thought I'd ask.
We'll come back every week and talk about it, Desiree.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of
4 hours. Just keep going.
Yeah, if it's not broken, don't rock the boat. And so if it's okay, but you don't like it, wait for a natural cycle in the future to replace it. To Eric's point, if you don't like it, if they're bad terms or they, heaven forbid, they have independent contractors with no independent contractor agreements, massive red flag for misclassification, then you got to do it at closing. But yeah, if it's they're in place, I don't love it, I wish we could improve some things, they're maybe not fully compliant with state law, I definitely would not come in like a bull in a china shop on day one. Hey, we're going to replace everyone's agreements. And when you do annual raises in a few months or whatever the cadence is, take that time to do it.
Awesome.
Chase, are we out of time?
If you guys can go 1 or 2 more minutes, I think we can bleed over a couple minutes.
Well, I just want to make a quick plug. We offer a 10% discount off our legal fees for both durable community members and for Amplio clients. for those of you that are on the call, we love what you guys are doing and appreciate you having us here.
Love it. It actually stacks and compounds if you're both an Amplio client and a Durable client. I think it's like 30% off.
And there's a multiplier and it gets great.
Like that. Yeah, exactly.
It goes exponential. It's 10 times 10. It's actually 100% discount. We do it for free.
I love it.
I am going to make sure to require all my clients use you guys then. I do it anyway.
As you should. Well, Eric, Kevin, truly, it's been awesome to watch you build SMB Law Group over the past several years, and just the domain expertise that you have honed in this weird little niche of small business, lower middle market M&A is valuable. So thanks for sharing that with us today. A couple things to bring us home. Again, we are attempting to build Utah's business commons. That's Durable, a place for business owners to gather. We do that in a number of different ways. Today's was through the chapter model, where we have our ETA chapter focused on entrepreneurship through acquisition. There's really three ways to continue to engage with Durable. One is subscribe to the Durable Dispatch. This is an email newsletter that gets delivered straight to your inbox. Content like this, practical thinking, essays, our event calendar. You can subscribe to the Durable Dispatch on Durable's website. You can show up. We have curated events. We have a number of private dinners, workshops, fireside chats going all throughout the year. And you can go deeper by joining a peer group. We have a couple of peer groups in Utah for business owners, kind of your advisory board, your board of directors that doesn't have the ability to fire you, your place you can go for big decisions and accountability. And those are kind of the three ways that you can keep this conversation going today. Also, quick plug for our Slack community. We have about 250, 300 Utah business owners in a Slack community. You can scan this QR code to join. And this is our upcoming event calendar, and also just a general plug. We have a lot of stuff going on throughout the year. So if you're looking to engage, come out to our hiking series. We have a lunch with the top SBA lender in the nation coming up in a couple of weeks with Ryan of Live Oak Bank. We have an expert webinar with Desiree, who's here with us today, coming up next week. So just a lot of different ways to engage if you're looking to get more integrated. With that, and for the sake of time, that wraps our expert webinar session. You can find this session later once it's uploaded, and all of the other sessions that we do on our YouTube library channel. We're calling it the Webinar Archive, and that's just on Durable's YouTube page. Kevin, Eric, you were very generous with your time. Just to kind of put a bow on it, what's the best way for folks to get in touch with SMB Law if they want to reach out?
I'm dropping our emails in the chat here. We're also at SMB Law Group on pretty much every social, and then our general inbox as well. I'll just put here contact form on the site. So yeah, grab those. We're definitely not hard to find. And yeah, reach out anytime if we can be helpful.
Awesome. Kevin, Eric, and everyone else, thank you. Joe, thanks for hosting today. We'll see you all on the next session.
Thanks, everyone.
See you guys.
Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.